Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Way UK podcast. My name is Zenya. On the sofa with me is...
Jesse.
Come on, Jesse. How you doing, Jesse?
I'm feeling good.
Yeah?
Feeling ready.
Yeah.
It's been a good day so far.
It has been. He had a toasty before we started
Had a
filming.
toasty, did some exercise.
It was great.
Days were good.
It's been a great day for Belly. And today we are so excited to have this conversation because we are joined by a very special guest. B is in the studio.
Hello.
How are you feeling, B?
I'm feeling really well today, actually. I'm feeling awake. Jesse made me the best coffee earlier, so
Wow.
I'm feeling awake.
Wow.
I think that means a lot. I don't hear that often.
Oh.
So,
You might be the first to ever say it.
well, we had a little coffee
Joking.
competition a few weeks ago,
Oh, and you didn't do
and
well?
I lost.
Oh.
But to
Sadly.
be fair, you were
I-
competing with a
I was-
barista.
Yeah, and you know, I did oat milk, which was harder.
Yep.
Known to be harder. Everyone knows oat milk's harder. No, but anyway, so that means a lot.
Do you know what? I've tried no one else's coffee, so maybe yours was just
Yeah.
good because I've tried no one else's.
No, you're
but I
right.
think it was decent.
Thank you.
Yeah, you should try that.
That's actually kind of crazy.
Can someone clip that? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Can you send it to me?
Joking, it was the best coffee I've ever had.
I'm going to
Love
set
it.
that as my alarm, so every morning I wake up.
The affirmation.
It's like,
This is the affirmation
you made great
need.
coffee today, and I'm like, yes.
I love it.
I can hack the day today.
I love it. We have a laugh over here on the podcast. We love it. But we are going to be having a conversation today kind of around like the topic of mental health, mental wellness. We've been in this little series where we've been talking about, you know, different things around the topic of mental health. And we'd be so excited to, I guess, unpick your brain, B, because you're kind of a big time professional around here in these streets.
Big time
Yeah,
professional.
big professional.
I need to clip that for my own
Yeah.
alarm.
Yeah.
Big time professional. I like it.
Could you maybe give us like a little who is B? Who do you be? What do you do? Come on.
Love that.
You've never
the
heard that one
bars.
before.
Honestly, it's original. So I am a licensed psychotherapist. I work in London. I do one-to-one therapy sessions. I also do workshops and like facilitate group sessions, all just on the process of mental health and helping people heal any trauma they've been through. My specialty is trauma. But of course, there's loads of different things that can emerge from that. Sometimes anxiety, depression, loads of different things. So that's who I am professionally. Aside from that, who am I? I am Zambian. I was born in Zambia, but I grew up in Wales. Very proud to be both. Love being from Wales. Love nature. Love long walks on the beach. I don't know. I feel like I'm creating a little
that's great.
profile here. What else do you want to know?
That's great. How did you get into that, being a psychotherapist? Because I feel like you don't just wake up one day and then hop into the office and be like, this is me.
Well, maybe you did.
Yeah, maybe you actually did. Maybe you rocked up one day and said, hey guys, I'm here. Open that office, get me a chair.
I love it.
No, how did you get into it?
Yeah, good question. So I would say when I was younger, so I'm one of three and I'm the middle child and I have two brothers. And it was great. Like I love it now as an adult, but growing up, I kind of hated it. Like if I'm being honest.
Right.
And I was quite a quiet child. Partially because my older brother's very extroverted, and he won't hate me saying this, but he was also very rebellious in his nature. And so throughout school or even at home, he was always rebelling, which meant my parents' attention was always on him. And then when I was in school, teachers would often compare me to my brother and would say it to my face. And so they'd say, oh, your brother's so loud, you're really quiet. And they said the quiet part like as if it was a negative. And so it was never a, we're glad you're not like your rebellious older brother. It was a, why are you like that?
Yeah.
And so like, it was like they were doubting who I was. And to me, that created all these negative thoughts around my own identity, how I show up. I was trying to not be like the naughty sibling, but also create my own identity. And then in being quiet, I wasn't actually being rewarded for that. And so I was like, wait, where do I go? And because I was quiet, I had no one to feedback that to. And so I was in my own head and I realized that I was like spiraling in my own mental health. And that was like my adolescence. So that was primary school where I was like, I'm trying to not be like my sibling because he gets all this attention. I don't really know if I want attention because when I do get attention, it's comparing me to him and it's saying it's a negative thing. And so me trying to be myself is being quiet and just getting my head down and sorting out school, but that's being critiqued. And so how do I navigate this? How do I show up? And then after a while, I was like, I don't even think I want to be in this space. Like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in school. I don't want people to know me. I don't want people to see me, because when they see me, they compare me. And when they compare me, it's as if there's a deficit within me. It's not even appreciating me. It's saying that there's something wrong, or saying I should be another thing. And so when I was really young, that was my mental health journey of like, who am I? Is being me okay? Because the way it was communicated to me by teachers was, actually, this is a problem.
Yeah.
Like, even though you're not like the kid who's in trouble all the time, you're also not how we think you should be. And so I was kind of dealing with their own comparisons of me and trying to figure out who I was, while also like being a child and trying to figure out who I was and trying to understand myself. And then in high school, because I was a more quiet child, I was a lot more observant of how everyone else was. And I think part of that meant that I would always gravitate to the quieter children, or like an underdog sort of personality. And I think I became aware of other people's suffering and other people's own struggles. And so a lot of how my teachers would describe me, or even sometimes my friends now when we reflect on it, would be, I'm the person who will like notice when something's going on. Like, I would notice the person who was being bullied, or I would notice the person who was like really struggling, or who was quiet. And because I knew my quietness wasn't necessarily because it's my nature, it was because I was trying to almost counteract what I felt like I should be, or not be like my brother. I was curious about their quietness. And so I guess I just became privy to other people's struggles. And so I remember being a teenager and having so many conversations with people around their own mental health and what was going on for them, while also dealing with my own thing. And it wasn't like I was in a comforter position and I was comforting them. It was just almost like a solidarity thing of, we're all struggling and we're in this together.
Yeah.
And so I just was curious about people. And I think a feeling I felt when I was really young was that no one really saw me or wanted to truly get to know me. They just wanted me to be something else. And so when I was trying to figure out what do I want to be, I was like, okay, I think I want to go down the psychology route, because I'm really curious about humans. I'm really curious about people and understanding people. But I'm also really passionate about people being able to exist and just be authentic and like live like truly to who they are in a sense. Rather than living out of their trauma or living out their hurt and their pain. And then part of that journey for me intersected with my faith, which is when I became Christian. I think a big part of that journey was God saying to me, like, I made you the way you are for a reason. Like, there is intention behind the way you are. And so even though everyone else is telling you need to be a certain way, or you need to be quiet, like, that's your way of coping. That's not the way I've made you. And so trying to unlearn that coping strategy and trying to, like, I really feel like my story is God taking me to the places of hurt and healing those things. And I think the process of therapy to me is also going to that place of hurt and then allowing healing for that. But that requires space and time. I think the beautiful thing about our faith is sometimes it is that instant prayer moment, but sometimes it's not. Like sometimes it's like 2-3 years and we keep going back to the same place and we're having the tough conversation and we're not rushing for like a false positivity. We're sitting in the suffering and we're allowing like healing and authenticity and truth to emerge in that space. And I think God really works in that. I think God works in the slowness. And I always think when I was like training to be a psychotherapist, I always thought about that story of Jesus and the woman at the well. And I always thought, what was it about Jesus that he sat with a woman that he shouldn't have been sitting with? Like there were cultural reasons why they shouldn't have been sitting with each other. It was midday. So she was like in her own shame, which again, in my own story, I resonate with feeling shame in just like existing and being. And so she was in a place of shame. She was there at the well at a time when no one else was there. So she was trying to do something isolated to sort her own self out. Jesus shows up. He's a man of a different like ethnic background that shouldn't be associating with her. And he could sit with her and he didn't necessarily say, you need to change now. He sat with her, almost called out her story, the point of which she feels her shame.
Yeah.
And then led her to a place of freedom, to like such an extent of freedom that she could go to her town and she could proclaim the story that was once her shame. And I thought, what is it about Jesus that he will sit with you and he's not forcing healing on you straight away, or he's not saying, oh, just because I'm Jesus, you're like healed right now. He's allowing the journey of healing to emerge in a way that doesn't shame you or cause you to like crumble, but actually allows space for you to own that story, and even for you to proclaim that story as a thing of redemption. And I think therapy is that to me. It's sometimes you will meet people and you'll say, oh, like this statement, like something true, like, oh, you're so loved. And that's so healing for some people. And then sometimes you meet people and you say, where's your husband? Oh yeah, you're not living with your husband. Like, and that's actually the healing, is in sitting with the messy stuff. And to me, that's therapy, is kind of sitting with that mess and allowing space for it. Because in that you can find real healing. And in that you can really, bring truth and life to that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So good. I wanted to ask you, there was something you said about like in your childhood about how, you know, like your teachers, in comparing you to your brother, they would see you in a certain way and expect you to be that way in the sense. And I definitely feel that growing up, like in school, like teachers are everything, right? Like, because at this point they're not your family, they're not like your mom, your aunts, but they're like the next, I guess, adult authority, adult. We were kind of debating how you say that word. Is it adult? Is it adult? Guys, leave a comment, let us know. We don't really know. Grown-ups like in your life that can really speak into you. And for me, like, I know my teachers had good intentions, but I think sometimes they can just put like unnecessary pressure on you. And I think at a young age as well, like you're still trying to figure out, okay, like who am I? Like what do I think about the world? What do I think about myself? And I think some of their, I guess, perceptions of you can almost internalize that, and that's not really healthy in like you just understanding who you are. And I was gonna ask, like, for like a young person maybe listening, because I know I've definitely felt that, like, how do you navigate those moments of like, I guess, identity, where it's like my teachers are telling me that I should be more this, or I should be like louder, or I should be like more confident, but I don't know, like, is that me? Like, do I want to be louder? Do I have to be an extrovert? Do I have to be an introvert? Like, how would you like suggest somebody to navigate that, like a teenager?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I think it's really difficult because, like you said, the voice of a teacher can impact you so much. Like, it can be really healing, but it can also be really harming. And I always say to my clients, like, we're harmed in community, but we're also healed in community. And I think sometimes when a teacher has told you need to be a certain way, or you have to behave a certain way, or you won't amount to anything. Like, there's so many people who have experiences of teachers saying, well, you'll never become a doctor, you're not smart enough. Something like that can really stop you from pursuing where you really feel called to, or where you really feel led. But I think also allowing yourself to remember that that voice is not the authoritarian voice in your life. Like, sometimes we've elevated teachers or other authoritarians. Sometimes it's our parents, especially when we're young, because they do have a level of authority. But I think within us all, we kind of know what path we should be on. And if not, sometimes our friends are able to call out truth in us. So I think it's where someone has spoken something that feels quite prescriptive over your life and can feel quite damaging. I think we first have to acknowledge that that feels damaging.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, they can look at therapy or mental health and think, well, I've not been traumatized. Like, I didn't go through X, Y, Z, and we can kind of try and compare and contrast a painful situation. But trauma is not always the event, it's how we respond to the event. That makes sense. And so for someone, trauma might have been their parent giving more attention to another sibling. That's really traumatic for them. They didn't receive the amount of nurture. For some people, it's the teacher saying something that was not true, like a lie or something very prescriptive to them. But for others, that, like, it's water off a duck's back. They don't even notice it. It doesn't matter to them. But I think if you're in that place where a teacher or an adult, someone in a place of authority, has said something that you know, like, is almost taking away life from you, or is causing you to live in a way that doesn't feel true or fulfilling or anything like that, it's acknowledging that that's a point of pain. And then I think it's about speaking truth into that. And part of that might be other people speaking truth into that, of who does everyone else know me to be? Because this teacher only sees me for a fragment of time throughout the week or throughout the day.
Yeah.
And so what they might see might not actually be authentic. It might just be their perception. Because other people will also communicate to you from their own hurt at times. Like, who knows? In the therapy world, there's so many times where I have conversations with people and I'm like, oh, actually, maybe you reminded that teacher of something that triggers them. And so they're not actually speaking truth. They're speaking from their own pain.
Wow.
And of course, we could spiral and think, well, is everyone else navigating things in a way where we're all just speaking from our triggers and we're all spiraling? But I think you have to acknowledge the point of pain.
Yeah.
And then you have to acknowledge that they don't fully know you, like they don't know you authentically. And I think when you're a person of faith, you can be like, well, who does know me? God knows me.
Yeah.
Or who else in my life knows me? My parents or my friends really know me authentically. And going to them almost as a place of feedback is really helpful. I think sometimes we're quite resistant to do that. And we hear something that hurts us and we like take it in and we don't tell anyone else because it feels shameful.
Yeah.
But actually that thing of shame is not the way we're meant to live. We're not meant to live from our shame. And so rather than allowing yourself to internalize and then shame and start this spiral of negative self-talk, go to someone else because they'll be able to provide clarity for you. They'll be able to speak truth into the situation.
Yeah.
I think when you're a teenager, it's really important what other people say around you. Because that can be so forming. Like in the psychology space, we call it an affirming experience or a redemptive experience or a corrective experience. Different modalities will use different terms. But where you've had a destructive experience, it's really helpful to then go to a place where you can have the corrective experience. And so where someone's spoken lies over you, it's really important to go to a place where someone can speak truth over you.
Great.
And like I said, that might be God, that might be friends, that might be family, but go to where someone knows you authentically. And then allow that truth to kind of saturate you. Because often when we don't do that, we will then live being guided by the lies of the other people. And unfortunately, even though your teachers might know a lot, they don't know everything.
Facts, yeah.
And so taking them off that pedestal is really important as a way of healing and as a way of having perspective. That's kind of where I'd go.
Yeah, super
it's
helpful.
cool. No, B, thanks so much for sharing some of that. It's
so
great
helpful.
to hear your story and so helpful. Already some practical wisdom that you've given us, which is great. I guess one of the hardest things that people find when it comes to mental health as Christians is sometimes it can feel like it doesn't really work together. Like having a faith but also struggling. Sometimes they can feel like two very different things, particularly when you are struggling and when you're in moments of, like in your story, feeling this comparison, feeling this shame. To try find Jesus in that feels very alien and feels very far.
Yeah.
I know in my story, when I've felt the lowest, when I've struggled the most, Jesus has felt far, but actually felt the closest as well. And I guess for you and your story, but also just in what you've seen in life, how do you see those two things, like struggling with mental health, struggling with all these things, but also having a faith? How do they collide? How do they come together in your story potentially?
Yeah. No, good question. I think one thing I've kind of come to terms with over time throughout my faith, but also in my practice, is suffering isn't always evidence that God isn't there or God is distant. And I think when I was younger, I really thought, oh my gosh, if I'm suffering, God's not like close. Like, do I even know Jesus? Am I even Christian enough?
Wow.
And like you said, it feels like a contradiction.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the lie we believe is also, I'm suffering because God doesn't love me or God isn't close.
Yeah.
But that's not true. And in my own story, actually, even though in my adolescence, yes, there was all that comparison, there was a negative self-talk, and I would even say self-hatred, if I'm honest, because that led to things like eating disorders. Like there's so many of these like mental health things that I probably didn't necessarily go into. But though my struggles became like worse and worse and I was spiraling, my point of becoming Christian was actually God meeting me and just allowing space for what was going on. Like it was a really healing moment in worship. Not an instantly healing moment, but like it was really healing. In that point where God was like, but I'm in this with you. Like Jesus is a man of sorrows, familiar with grief. And like, he doesn't run from that. Like he's in that with you.
Yeah.
And I think when we're trying to reconcile our faith and our suffering, I once had an old lecturer of mine say, in order to have a theology of healing, we have to have a theology of suffering.
Yeah.
And I think unfortunately our theology of suffering is sometimes, well, if I suffer, God's not there. But we need to also unpack that and be like, why is that the way I think? Actually, God is still very present even when we're suffering, but it's how do we turn to him? And also what might be in our lives that he's provided that helps with our healing journey. And so part of that is you feel the closeness in worship, or you maybe, for me, even though I was going through my self-hatred, I was really numb, which can happen when you experience trauma. You can almost numb out, feel no emotion, or you can become really depressed and really low. And so for years, I remember myself not crying as an adolescent. Like there was no emotion there. And when I first felt God meet me, it was this breakdown of tears. And I was like, why am I crying? Like this feels like a foreign experience. I don't like it. But actually in that release, like something was released. But again, part of the journey of walking through like pain or hurt or mental health with Jesus, I think can be looking at the other things like the community he might bring around you. That's really redemptive and God's working through those people. Or it might be you being moved from living with one person to another because that was a really traumatic space. I think the way God works in our mental health can be so intricate and can be so different for different people.
Yeah.
And in my story, it was a combination of like that instant miraculous moment that felt really supernatural, but it was also then God surrounded me with people that I didn't even realize were people I could rely on, who would hold space for me and allow me to be authentic and to process some of those things. And like I said earlier about the teacher speaking a lie and having other people to speak truth, I think part of the way that God's worked with me is surrounding me with people who can speak truth. And that I think is actually really divine.
Yeah.
Like when people can speak truth and life into you, I think there's something deeply, deeply godly about that. And so that's what was healing for me.
No, it's great. I think there's so much we can talk about. It's funny, as you're speaking, I'm kind of remembering one of our other podcasts, the New Year's resolutions one, where on my resolutions, one of the things that was like a list was to stop biting my fingernails, which is very random. But we were talking about earlier about our own experiences of therapy and mental health issues. And for me, when I was 15, I went and did therapy, did something called CBT, specifically for my nail biting habit.
Okay.
Right.
So that was the reason. And it was speaking themes like you're saying, like, okay, find the lie and then find the truth and attack the lie with the truth, because the truth always overcomes the lie, which is also super biblical, which is pretty cool. But I didn't actually see breakthrough. I didn't see this habit diminish really in that time at all. And actually it's only 5 years later now that for the first time I can come to the end of the year and be like, I have a full set of fingernails, which is like a super random thing, and it's unique to me a bit. Well, actually, no, it's not. Lots of people do it. But something that really was tricky for me to kind of understand and get was particularly that Romans 12 passage over the years. Like the renewal of the mind is what it describes it as. Because I fully believed it. I believed that I could be changed in a second, but I also didn't see that. And there's still things in my life that I'm like, wow, I believe I could be healed of this in a second, healed of this shame, healed of this. But I'm just not there yet. And that's actually really painful sometimes. It's like the process, like there's pain in the process, you know. And you mentioned yourself, for you there was a moment, but also there was a journey. And I just wondered, do you mind speaking into that whole theme of the journey of renewing your minds, not just a second, and maybe what you have experienced, but also seen in that kind of space?
Yeah, definitely. I think the mind is a very interesting place, sometimes a very scary place for us, sometimes a very beautiful place. But yeah, I think the renewal of your mind is a lot of the work of therapy. I was just thinking when you asked me about the contradictions or the perceived contradictions of our faith versus therapy, I was thinking one of the other things I see as a common point of contention with Christians when I speak to them is when they're talking about loving your neighbor as yourself or dying to self. And they're like, how am I meant to love myself if I'm meant to die to self? They're like, I don't get this.
Wow.
And actually I was pondering this and I was thinking, I think there has almost been a translation error, or there's been a a confusion between the psychology space and the theology space or the church space, because I think in psychology, when we're talking about loving yourself, what we actually mean is loving like the God image in you, like the Imago Dei. It's like loving that like divine version of you, the version of you that is the version that thrives or is the best version of you, not the traumatized version, like almost the ideal version of you.
Right.
And then when we're talking about like healing in the psychology space, it's like dying to your ego. And I think a lot of Christians will hear, oh, I need to love myself. And they'll be like, oh no, that's like self-centered. That's not the way of being being a good Christian.
Yeah.
But actually what we're saying in psychology is we want to become more like the image of God within us. Like that's what we're trying to grow into. That's where we're trying to become. We're trying to die to our ego.
Wow.
And actually dying to your ego is that dying to self, because it's ego and flesh are almost the same word. If that makes sense, they're almost synonymous.
Wow.
And then Imago Dei, in that like becoming more like Jesus, becoming more Christ-like and being more renewed, that's the process of therapy for me. And so when I have a client, what I don't want to do is I don't want to be like, okay, you've been through loads of trauma. That's okay. We're going to stay here. That's not the point of it. We want to heal and we want to grow and we want to develop. And I want you to live out in freedom. And I think that is part of that God image in you, is that there's freedom in it.
Yeah.
And like when you're in Christ, you're free. And a lot of us have experienced trauma and pain and we're not feeling free. And so in order to grow and heal is to love yourself in that sense.
Wow.
But it's dying to the flesh. It's dying to that pain and that death that came in with the flesh.
Wow.
And so I think there's, a bit of a confusion that we have in the church sometimes, because so many people will be like, no, therapy is self-centered and it's just enabling. And I'm like, no, we're trying to become more Christ-like. And part of that is the renewal of the mind process. So to actually answer your question, sorry, I thought I'd say this because I hear so many Christians almost feel confused by it and then feel really resistant to therapy and mental health conversations because they're like, that's un-Christ-like. But it's no, I'm being formed into like more like Jesus. That's the process of therapy, is we're removing all the stuff, like the mess, where we can acknowledge that, we can accept that it happened. I'm not saying we reject what's happened to us. I'm not saying we reject maybe our story or our trauma. But what I'm saying is the ultimate process is to work towards freedom, and in Christ we're free. And so the version of us that's free is that version that's in Christ. And I think even when therapy is not explicitly Christian, when we're working towards that freedom with someone who is a safe person, truly safe, not someone with an agenda, that leads to us imaging Christ better. And the renewal of the mind process is a massive part of that, because so many of us, because of our experiences, will be believing certain lies about ourselves, or we'll have certain habits. And some things in our mind are subconscious and some things we're conscious of. There was a study done at Stanford Uni where they figured out that on average we have like 60,000 thoughts a day. And so some of them you're aware of. I know. I know. I was thinking about this.
Xenia only has 10,000.
Yeah, because I only use my brain for like a certain point of the day, and then afterwards I just shut it off. It's too much.
I love it. No, same. Honestly, I was thinking about it last night. It was like 60,000. Let me try and figure out like 100 thoughts I've had today. And of course, there's things that you're not even like really aware of like, I've noticed your shoes, but I wouldn't think I've had that thought about the color of your shoes.
Yeah.
But there's so many things we're processing throughout the day, consciously, but also unconsciously. And so part of that renewal of the mind process is in therapy, you have space to actually unpack some of those things that you've not paid attention to. Because a lot of the process of therapy is attending to what's going on for you. And so where you might have gone into therapy and you said, okay, I have this habit that I really want to sort out. A lot of us would be like, okay, so then how do we fix the habit? Like you said, sometimes it's like finding the truth and replacing the lies with the truth. And that can feel quite simple, but sometimes that can feel really difficult. But sometimes that process is slightly longer. So it's, okay, sorry, I'm going to use you as an example.
Use me.
He's here.
But it's, okay, I'm biting my nails. And then my process with the client would be like, okay, so where did this habit stem from?
Yeah.
Is it a comforting habit? Is it a self-destructive habit? Is it something you're doing almost to harm yourself? Because you can bite your nails so far on that it's actually really painful. Is it a coping thing? And so allowing space to unpick, okay, what's the source of this, but also what's it doing for you? Because a lot of our habits, they in some way might have served us, especially when we were younger. If you were in a really traumatic space, actually biting your nails, you always have your nails in your hand. So that might have been really soothing for you. It might have been a way for you to regulate your emotions. And you might have had parents or guardians who didn't allow space for you to regulate with them. They didn't meet your emotions. They didn't even allow you to cry at home. Maybe it was, you're a boy, you shouldn't cry. Boys don't cry. Or maybe it was, we don't care. Like they just left you to cry. And maybe they didn't say they didn't care, but their actions communicated a lack of care. And so that's the way you learned to soothe. And actually when you were younger, that was really helpful. And so part of my role is to meet that younger version of you in a sense and be like, no, that was really healing for you. We don't want to hate the habit, even if it feels like it doesn't serve you now. We have to meet ourselves with a level of self-compassion. But then from that place of compassion, it's like, how do we rewire from there? And I think part of the renewal journey is going back to go forward.
Yeah.
Because the truth sometimes feels like a bandage over like a gaping wound, when actually we need to tend to the wound and then speak truth into that as like the final like antiseptic and like medical dressing. And so, yeah, the renewal process, I don't think it's always as simple as saying affirmations, or I think it can be really helpful when you're even saying Bible verses over yourself, especially if you don't know your identity. I know that's part of my story. It's being able to say, if I don't know who I am, who am I in Christ? Like that's really helpful.
Yeah.
But also there's more to that of like, but also who am I in other settings? Who am I as a daughter? Who am I as a friend? Who am I in work? All of those things are just as, not just as important, but they are important. And I think they need to be sat with as well. And so, yeah, part of that renewal process is going back to maybe the roots of what happened and why you do what you do, meeting yourself with compassion. And then from there, it's like, okay, I understand the pain. I understand what was going on. But then how do I almost come into alignment with myself and who I want to be, and come into alignment with that imago Dei, like I was saying, that God image in me. And then I think the truth takes you to that place. There's a thing in a type of therapy called EMDR called dual awareness. And it's when it's in Christian terms, it would be like head knowledge versus heart knowledge. It would be like, I might know God loves me, but I don't feel like God loves me. Or in therapy terms, sometimes we say inner child versus like your adult self. So you might have this experience where you were younger, where, like I said, your parents maybe let you cry and they wouldn't come and comfort you. And so as a child, you might believe, oh, my parents don't care about my emotions. My emotions aren't valuable because no one paid attention to them. And so you have this core belief, and that might navigate how you walk throughout your life. It might mean that you never tell people how you're truly feeling. You never show up and be truly authentic. And you might not even think this is where it stems from, but that might be where it stems from. And sometimes therapy like brings that up. And so you might walk through life, you're not showing people your emotions, you're not allowing yourself to be authentic because the childhood version of you felt deeply rejected when your parents didn't come to you when you felt vulnerable. And then, so you might have that belief, that's your inner child sort of wound. And then you might have your adult self that's like, I'm being ridiculous though. Like, I know this isn't true. And I think part of process or coming into that image of God is aligning the two thoughts and being able to comfort your inner child or comfort and like accept that head knowledge, but bring it into alignment with the heart knowledge and become whole again. Like there's something about wholeness in that, because a lot of our trauma will fragment us. It will create this maybe resistance we might have with our own body or with our own mind. We start to almost want to reject ourselves. And so when we're able to bring that into aligning and acknowledge both, meet things with compassion, but also speak truth. The truth is the glue that brings you back together.
Wow.
And I think the truth is what does like almost mend us. I think the truth is truly healing. And sometimes the truth is, it's not that your parents didn't care. It's that you had another sibling who might have had additional needs. And so they had to attend to that person because that person had the additional needs. And being able to speak that truth, but also be met with love and compassion, which I think God meets us with, but I think others meet you with as well. That can be truly healing. There was another study done about the best type of therapy. And so there's so many different modalities. Like you said, CBT, EMDR, psychotherapy, Gestalt, there's so many, I could list off so many different things. And the question was, what type of therapy is the most beneficial for people? Like, is there a specific modality that works the best? And what they found is it's not even about the type of therapy. It's about whether you do therapy with someone who's warm and accepting and welcoming. And we call that the therapeutic alliance in therapy. It's about the relationship you build with the person. And I think actually when we talk about that warmth or that acceptance or that someone being able to simply sit with you, I think to me that feels a lot like Jesus, like someone who can be there with you And like I said, not enable your bad behavior. That's not what anyone wants. But to sit and journey with you, I think that's the journey of faith. It's a journey. And I think, therapy is a bit of a journey as well, where you can sit with someone, and move towards that healing, move towards that God image, move towards that alignment. And the truth is the glue of that. It's what really seals it together. Yeah.
As you were talking, like literally you bring it back to Jesus is funny, because in my head I was like, all I can hear right now is just Jesus. Like in everything that you were saying, even with the like Imago Dei thing and how like that's even a part of psychology, like that kind of language. And like what you were talking about, how it's not about like enabling like our behaviors, but it's about, I don't want to say holding space because that's so funny, but like it's like speaking into and acknowledging, hey, this is something that you're going through, or like this is a part of your story, but also like there is freedom on the other side of this. And how you brought up John 4, the woman at the well, that's literally what Jesus did. Like he spoke to her and he was like, hey, look, I see that you have multiple husbands. Like, what's going on here? Like, I see that this is something that you're going through. But then after that, he says, hey, look, drink the water that I give you. Like, you'll never thirst again. Like, it will be like a spring of life within you. And like, that's what Jesus does. He acknowledges, hey, look, this is an area that you might be struggling with, or hey, I can see there's a crack here, but also here I am to like, to give you freedom. Here I am to like heal the crack and like move things back together. And it's like what you were saying with almost like the two sides, how they come together and they're like in that wholeness. I just thought that was really cool. Like literally that's what Jesus does. Like he acknowledges our pain. He acknowledges our wounds. He acknowledges the things that we kind of feel a bit maybe insecure about. And he acknowledges that, but he also says, hey, look, here I am. Like, here's the freedom that you've been looking for. It's in me. I love that. I just wanted to add that. That was really cool.
No,
for myself and the viewers, Imago Dei, it's a word that you've thrown around a few times. What does that mean?
It just means image of God.
Wow.
So in the Bible, when it talks about being made in the image of God, that would have been the language used. And so it literally just is that fact that you're made in the image of God.
I love it.
It's great.
Yeah, I think Dei is God and Imago's image.
Ooh.
But maybe I said that because Imago starts with the same 3 letters in it as image. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know Latin.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, my head,
checks
that's
out.
how it works out. Yeah. So yeah, just God image. But no, I think that is, it's very true. I think the way of Jesus is to journey with, but provide a path to freedom.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in society these days, we're so focused on acceptance. And I'm not against that by any means. I think, like I said, self-compassion, a level of acceptance, like totally good. But sometimes we get so stuck in that and we don't get to the point of actual healing or freedom. And I did an assembly the other day in a primary school for some year 6s, and we were talking about anxiety. And I was saying to the group, like, your anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not here to demonize your anxiety, because a little bit of anxiety is really, really helpful. It's just when it becomes debilitating and it stops you from actually being able to do what you need to do in life. It stops you from going to school or putting yourself out there with friendships, things like that. And we were talking about how often we allow our emotions to guide us. And the children said to me, like, no one's ever said to me that my emotions shouldn't be my guide. And I was saying, actually, the reality is when it comes to our emotions, yes, they're so important. I'm so curious about emotions, my emotions, your emotions, everyone's emotions. That's part of why I'm a therapist. I really care about it. I think your emotions are a real indicator as to what's going on for you.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you might be having a conversation with me and what's coming up for you is a real feeling of anxiety. And it might be about the conversation, but it might also be about what this conversation reminds you of.
Yeah.
And so that's what we need to kind of work with. And so your emotions are really helpful. They're an indicator as to what's going on, and they often make sense in the context in which we experience them. However, they're not always helpful as directors of our life. Like if we always followed our emotions and just were guided by our emotions, we probably wouldn't get a lot done. Like I wouldn't go to the gym if I followed my emotions, because sometimes I don't want to go.
Hey,
and
that's
so,
real.
like I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do homework. I wouldn't do a lot of things that I actually have to do in order to be a functioning member of society. And so though we need to acknowledge our emotions, be compassionate about our emotions, sometimes we need to remember that, we be curious about our emotions, but we don't always need to be guided by our emotions. And I think when we're working towards that freedom and that healing, sometimes it's about pushing past your emotions to get to that point of healing. Like sometimes you'll be sitting with a lot of fear, For example, if you have to do public speaking, you'll be sitting with a lot of fear. And what your emotions will want you to do is run away from that, avoid the situation completely. But actually what freedom is it's building a window of tolerance. This is another therapy thing. I'll explain it.
Come on.
But your emotions will want you to run away, avoid the situation. What will be really helpful for you, though, is to face the situation, because actually that's another way to renew your mind. Because you might have a core belief that if I public speak, it will go wrong, I will fail, I'm not very articulate. When you do the public speaking and it doesn't go wrong, you now have a new core belief that I'm capable of doing this, I am very able to do this, and it didn't go wrong. And so this truth, which you have evidence for by actually doing the thing, can counteract the lie that you once had evidence for.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you need to push past the emotion. And when I say window of tolerance, what I mean by that is we all have this sort of window of things we're able to tolerate. So for example, I'm able to have the one-to-one conversation, but if I struggle with anxiety, group conversations, I cannot do. And that can pull me into two spaces. One space is called hyper-arousal, one space is called hypo-arousal. And it's not arousal in like the romantic sense. It's like just a state of loads of adrenaline and cortisol versus like you crashing. So if you're in a place where you're fine with one-on-one conversations, that's your window of tolerance. You can tolerate that. Your body's okay with that. It might be a little bit stressful, but you can tolerate it. But if it becomes so overwhelming, you go into a thing of hyper-arousal. That's when you feel anxious, you feel overwhelmed. Wow. It's the adrenaline. It feels really energetic. And that's when you might want to run away from something. You might like start freezing up, like you just don't know how to deal with that. But the opposite of that is hypo-arousal, which is where you kind of go into like this numb state. Like if something's too overwhelming for you, you might just freeze and numb out completely. Like it's almost like you blank out and you don't know what to do. And the way to actually kind of solve what's going on here is you need to widen your window of tolerance. You don't need to avoid those two states. What you need to do is you need to prove to yourself that you can do the thing that is causing you to feel either overstimulated or numbed out. And so to widen your window of tolerance, like I was saying, it's not to follow your emotion. It's actually sometimes to do the thing despite your emotion. Yeah. And so the group setting might be anxiety inducing, and rather than running away because you feel anxious, which a lot of us would do, and that feels comforting in the moment. It's almost a false sense of comfort because it doesn't actually heal. Wow. It just in the moment is a bit of a comfort method. But in order to truly heal and to truly reframe your mind, maybe stay for an extra 2 minutes. You don't like a big group. Don't completely like go into a new school and try and befriend everyone. That's overwhelming. You might like stress your mind out. But like do something little that can widen your window of tolerance. Give yourself 5 extra minutes in a crowd. Because even though it will feel painful, what it will do is it will prove to you that you can do that thing. And it will stop you from going into those states of either loads of anxiety, loads of adrenaline, loads of panic, maybe even panic attacks, or it will stop you from going into that state of like numbing out and crashing out completely and like, feeling really depressed and low. And so you have to push past your emotions in order to truly like widen that window of tolerance. And then as you do that, you move to that place of healing. I don't know if that made sense.
No, it did.
What are you guys sitting with as I say this?
Do you know what I was thinking of? I was thinking of Inside Out to you.
No way!
Stop it.
I was going to say that.
What I was thinking of, I don't know if but I don't know if you were thinking the same thing, but you know how you were talking about how like essentially like emotions are not facts. Like just because you feel a way about something doesn't mean that's actually the truth of the situation, right? And how in Inside Out too, like Riley basically, if you haven't seen the movie, so sorry for you. This big spoiler, but you should have seen it by now, so sorry. But essentially like her emotions kind of like sit at the keyboard of her, I guess her core. So like joy will take over and then that might cause her to like just feel more happy or feel more confident to do things. And then anxiety will take over and that will cause her to like overthink everything or like change her behavior based on who she's around because she wants to be approved and all this stuff. And like for me, whilst you were talking, like I'd never really seen Inside Out in this perspective. Like I've always seen it as like, oh, it's a movie about like self-awareness, like being able to check in with your emotions. But actually like these emotions kind of drive her life. Like most of, if not all of her behaviors are based on how I feel. And therefore how I feel is how I'll do. Like if I feel happy, then I'll do what I need to do. And if I don't, then I'll retreat. And I kind of like what you were saying, like, I guess faith is almost like the antidote to that, is the antidote of you like letting your emotions take the driving seat. It's like with faith, like with Jesus, I know there are times where I might feel like oh, I don't feel confident enough to share a thought in a group of friends because I feel like, oh, what are they going to say? Like, what do they think? But Jesus will like prompt me. He'll be like, no, actually, I want you to speak to that person. I want you to tell them this thing. And it's like, with Jesus, he gives me the strength and the confidence to like push through like how I might be feeling and to go for it. And then when I share that thought, it might actually land like, and somebody actually like, is like, oh, thanks for telling me that. Or like, wow, I really felt God in what you were saying. And it's like, wow, like we can't be so held back by our emotions or let our emotions kind of take that driving seat in our life. Like with faith, along with Jesus, like he almost breaks that and he allows us to have more life experiences so then we can like break those, I guess, lies that we believe. Because it's like, wow, the more I step out and the more I speak to people, the more they actually connect with what I'm saying. Oh, that's definitely not true then. Like, Lord, wow, thank you for that. And like now I can be more confident in that area. So that's kind of like what I was thinking as you were speaking.
It's the renewal, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the renewal that you're speaking about. Yeah, I mean, as I'm listening to you, B, I'm just like thinking all about me. I'm like, gosh, I've got a lot to reflect on. I'm going to reevaluate my whole life.
Bro, that's a journal after this.
Yeah, that journaling. Bro, my journal is worn.
About to finish that journal.
But maybe not. I've still... That'd be impressive if I finished
Can
the
you
journal.
imagine?
No, but I think it's funny when you have these kind of conversations because it does spark things in you.
Yeah.
It makes me think. Like I'm thinking, oh man, where are some areas where I need this improvement on? Where are some areas where I sometimes feel this stuff and don't really know how to process it? And actually kind of even having this conversation can be quite a big stirrer of like feelings coming up. It can be like the first moment of feeling, oh flip, I might need to address some things, you know. And maybe some people are watching and feeling that. They're like, wow, I've got so much to work on.
Yeah.
I know I am a little bit. But just some like practicals, like how, what, where do we do that well? And maybe how do we not get too deep and caught up in this self-awareness thing? Like how do we, what's some next steps after you've begun this self-awareness process?
Good question.
Yeah, really good question. I think a big part of our healing isn't to go into analysis. Like a lot of us, actually to our own detriment, will start to analyze everything we do, everything we feel, everything we say. And when I say our emotions aren't the guider of what we should do, that doesn't mean that we need to go full logic. Like we have emotions and a mind, like we're body, mind, and spirit for a reason. And it's about integration of the things. But I think a big part of therapy and even a big part of our faith is you do so with someone who's almost a guide. Like as a therapist, when I'm sitting with a client, we're doing it together. It's not just me witnessing them doing it. Although part of the therapeutic journey is being there with them and literally witnessing. It's not just about that. And I think when you were talking about like Jesus prompting you to say things, or if we take it back to the woman at the well, where Jesus sat with her in that, it's done collaboratively. I think a lot of our healing is done in collaboration. And like I said earlier, yes, we're hurt often by others, but we're healed by others. And so I think after hearing a conversation like this, one of the worst things might be to isolate and start spiraling, because that again can start to create really negative thoughts about yourself. And when you're trying to analyze and unpick yourself, sometimes you don't actually have a healthy perception of yourself and you can't provide that truth, which again is why earlier I said sometimes you need your friends or your family to speak that truth into you.
Yeah.
And so I would be really cautious for anyone to leave this conversation and think, oh my goodness, I have a lot to work through, so I'm going to go by myself and sort myself out. It's not really how healing works. It's very rarely an individual endeavor. It's often done communally, whether that's with therapists, whether that's with God. That's a relationship, right? It's not an individual thing. God will guide you on that, whether it's done with family. And I think the other side of it is it can be so easy for us to start judging ourselves and thinking, how do I need to unpick things? I'm such a problem. And that can lead to shame. And we're not meant to be walking from a place of shame. Like there's a big difference between shame and guilt. And shame is thinking, I am bad. My feelings are bad. My thoughts are bad. Everything's bad. What I've done is bad. And it's about almost judging who you are as a being. Where guilt is reflecting on the thing you've done. And there's a separation there because I can say, oh, I did a bad thing, but I myself am not a bad person. And I think when you're overanalyzing yourself, you can really end up falling into a place of shame.
Wow.
And I actually don't think the way of Jesus is to shame us.
Yeah.
I don't think he met the woman at the well and shamed her. Actually, he met her and he could talk about her shame in a way that she didn't feel shame because she then went on to tell other people about it. And so, yeah, I would just reemphasize to people, yes, you might have some things to think about. And yes, journaling might be a part of that. But I think if you have the opportunity to, whether it's seeing a therapist, which I know is really inaccessible, like I'm so aware that not everyone has that option, but sometimes schools have counselors, sometimes you might have a mentor or someone you trust in your church. Like I said, the thing that really helped people's therapeutic journey was when they have a warm and welcoming and understanding therapist. It wasn't the type of therapy. And I think actually the thing that can really be healing for us is when we have another person, whether that's God, whether that's a mentor, a teacher, a parent, who's warm and understanding and allows space for us to kind of have these thoughts and questions and maybe tell our story. Sometimes the freedom is even just telling another person like, hey, this happened to me and I've never told anyone that. And that can be so healing. But when we hold it ourselves, I don't think a lot of us are equipped to hold things by ourselves. Even I can't hold things by myself. And I'm a therapist. Like I've had so much therapy. And I probably will again in the future if I ever need it. But I can't even hold space for myself fully. Like it still has to be done with my friends or with God or journaling. There's all of these things that are done collaboratively. So just to emphasize, like, I know you might feel inclined to analyze yourself and try and unpick things. But that's not the goal of healing. It's not the goal of faith either, to analyze. Actually, a lot of our healing is found in like simply being rather than going to this place of, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? Because that also is that place of hyper arousal where you're overwhelmed, you feel anxious, and you're trying to outwork the almost the energy within you, all the adrenaline within you. So be cautious about going to that place because that can cause you to spiral. And I think I've said this a few times throughout this episode. Self-compassion is huge because your feelings and what you're thinking, the things you probably want to analyze probably make sense within the context of your story, even if you don't recall the whole of your story. And so don't move too quickly to analyze it. Maybe speak to a friend, maybe pray about it, maybe do all of the above. Journal, pray, speak to a friend. That's like the holy trinity of things. Maybe do all those things because that will be a big part of your healing. It has to be done in community.
That's great.
And I think that's why God made us to be in community, so we can have all those healthy mirrors. That's what we call it in therapy, is someone being a mirror. So that's a huge part of things.
Yeah, love that. That was so equipping.
Wow.
So helpful. Like, I've learned a lot. I know Jesse's been thinking. I've been thinking.
What does that mean?
You just said you've been thinking. Like, you've been thinking, feeling like, oh, things are coming up.
No, I have.
Feeling things. But this was so helpful. And I feel like if I had this conversation when I was like 16, I think this would have set me up for a big win, like later on in life. And I think, you know, sometimes we can be so in our heads about things. And I think actually sitting down and hearing, actually, no, like what you're going through, you don't have to feel shame about it. You don't have to like hide it away in the dark. No, Jesus wants to hear about it. Like God wants you to invite him in and also invite community. Like who are your mentors? Who are your friends? Like who's your safe space that you can go to and say, hey, look, I'm feeling these things. Like, let's talk about it. Like, can you speak truth over me? Like, what does God say? But like, there's so much that you've said that has just been so helpful. And I feel like will resonate with so many people. So thank you. Thank you, V.
Yeah, and also
thank you for sharing.
I probably had a conversation like this when I was 15, when I was 14. And yet I didn't see instant change. I didn't see instant freedom.
Yeah.
Like we've talked a bit about that process that you go on. So also if you feel stuck and you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I really need that. And I've been going at that for like a year and I still haven't seen the freedom yet. I still am stuck in this thing or stuck feeling this shame or just stuck feeling anxious and overwhelmed. Like it's okay. Like God's just on a journey with you. And sometimes it does take years. Sometimes it happens in a second, but sometimes it does take years. So just another little encouragement before we leave. It's like, yes, listen to these words. Like, thank you, B, for everything you brought. But also, if it doesn't change tomorrow, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's a process, hey?
And God wants to go on that process with us. He's not afraid of the process.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much, B, for
Thank you
sitting
for
with us
having me.
in the studio. This was so cool. And thank you guys for tuning in and listening. Leave us a comment if you're on YouTube. Leave us a comment. Let us know if there's something that stood out to you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And we'll be back, I guess, next week with another episode, or
Indeed.
maybe in a couple of days. I'm not sure. You'll have to figure that out. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. And we will see you next time.
See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.